Okay, everybody, we're getting ready to start here. Just a reminder, we are recording this session. And let me just let these last few people in. Ari will introduce our panelists, or they'll introduce themselves. And so our moderator, for those of you who do not know him, is Ari Betoff. I'm going to let him do his own introduction, but he is the founder of Mission and Data and has deep and broad experience with independent schools. Ari, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks so much, Martha. I'm so glad to be back with you all again for a second day. Yesterday was such a wonderful conference day. I enjoyed getting to meet virtually at least so many of you. I love the robust conversation we had during yesterday's panel. And for those who were part of the panel, we're going to try to pull together some of the themes that we talked about yesterday, pull some of them forward. We're going to talk about some new things as well. If there are particular topics that we don't hit today, maybe because we covered some of them yesterday, but certainly we're interested in your questions as well. So please add them into the chat. But without further ado, I want to let the panel introduce themselves. As Martha said, I'm Ari Betoff, co-founder and partner at Mission and Data. I'm also the Chief Advancement Officer at Minerva Institute for Research and Scholarship in San Francisco. And as I said, thrilled to be with you. So Diane, why don't we kick it off with you?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Isola, and this is my 19th year as CFO of Crystal Springs Upland School. We are a 6th through 12th grade school in the Bay Area on the peninsula. And we actually opened a new middle school campus in August of 2017, which brought our enrollment up to 570 students. And we have about 120 regular full-time and part-time employees. And I'm happy to be here.
You want to pass it on to someone?
Carrie?
Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Ari. I'm Carrie Katz. I'm the Director of Human Resources for Loyola High School. I am completing my 15th year, although it feels like it's been just maybe 3 or 4. We're a single urban high school. We're a Jesuit school for all boys. We have just under 1,300 students, I guess, coming in closer to about 1,260. We have 190 full-time faculty and staff. We have 75 seasonal employees, and that includes athletic coaches, program moderators, substitutes, and also classroom proctors in the new remote world. And I think for me, just really quickly, the pandemic really highlighted our weaknesses in how we communicate and how we work together, whether it's in the same room or whether it's apart. And I think, as we sort of go into what we appreciate about what we learned is really how to be more compassionate, more patient, and more understanding.
Wonderful, thank you. And Malika.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malika Dinsby, and I'm the HR Director at the Brandeis School of San Francisco. We're a K-8 Jewish day school. We have 318 students and 86 employees. Next year, it looks like we'll have 357 students. Brandeis is the first private school I have worked for. I've also worked for Brandeis Marin and Jewish Community High School of the Bay while at Brandeis. Before Brandeis, I worked for tech companies such as Terra Recon and Connectix. I'm currently in my 7th year at Brandeis. And this past year, I was a part of our health and safety committee. I became the pandemic coordinator for our school, and I'm a part of the equity and inclusion committee. In addition to working at Brandeis, I'm a wife and a mom of 4. This year has been super crazy, but solution focused. And I think it highlighted what a wonderful community we've created.
I love that phrase, solution focused. That's a really good one. So just so everyone who's joining us today can sort of understand how we're going to spend our time, we're going to have a conversation that I'm going to facilitate for the next 10, 15 minutes or so with the panelists. And as we move out of that period, I'll begin to weave in questions through the chat. So I'd encourage you, if you do have questions, to please put them in there. And we're going to work in as many of those into our conversation today as we can. So I'd love to start with the panel and just ask sort of a broad question, maybe Malika, beginning with you. As you think through both takeaways from the conference so far and the year so far, what are one or two things that are really standing out to you related to reimagining the workplace, as you know, as we begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel of this COVID period we've been in, even though we know we're a long way from a post-COVID world?
Right. Some of the things that stood out for me during yesterday's conference was reevaluating our systems. Right now I have payroll and our HRS system are two different systems. And I think because we had so much change last year, I don't want to talk about changing or upgrading. And I think I need to change my mind about that and, do what will make our school operate smoother.
Yeah. I think that balance, many people are feeling. There are opportunities for change and people are exhausted, right? And a lot of that exhaustion is around the fact that we've overstretched our capacity for agility, right? And so balancing those things, choosing those sort of highest return on investment areas related to change and showing patience with everything else is a real challenge right now. Carrie, what about you?
Yeah, thanks, Ari. I think one of the biggest
You reached
things.
60 on your math puzzles Friday,
Oh,
and you finish your AR at 75% by Friday. I'm going to give you $20 for
I think we've
Minecraft or
got
whatever you
somebody
want.
who is unmuted and excited about math puzzles.
not me.
I think I've got them muted. So I'm a big fan of math puzzles. So
Yep.
go
Yeah.
ahead, Carrie.
There you go. I think one of the big takeaways for me, good or bad, was actually sort of the reminder that we do need to be flexible. And I think in a conversation with Martha, she used the word nimble. And that has been so vital for me to remember that this is not the way that it was a year ago or 2 years ago. This is, I got to be able to think on my feet. I got to be able to make sound decisions. I need to be able to gather people with great ideas and just be able to bounce things off of them so that I can make really good choices for everyone. Thank you.
And Diane.
Well, I have to say, I think the tagline that stuck with me from yesterday, Ari, was your line of "a pandemic is not a business model."
I was borrowing, as much as I would love to take credit for that. That was borrowed, I think, from the CEO of I forget which company that is. It's the food delivery company.
Yeah, but I just thought, like, how true is that? I think most of us in our roles, like, what we most often planned for is the big earthquake, right? But definitely the pandemic is not a business model. And honestly, as I reflect back on the last 13 months, I think what sticks out for me is really how amazing our PAC has been. PAC stands for Professional Adult Community. And that's the term we use to encompass all our employees. And I have really been in awe of how resilient they have been, from sheltering in place, pivoting in a matter of days to a distant learning program, and then pivoting again to a hybrid, and then very soon pivoting to 100% back in person with all our students. So I'm very much in awe of how resilient they have been and how flexible. But the other thing that I think sticks out for me in particular is how we've really addressed decision-making during these past 13 months. And we kind of adopted at Crystal, we adopted 4 mantras. And I think they're really, they've just been really critical in our decision-making process. And the first one is, in all our decisions, we decided early on in the pandemic that we were going to meet our community members halfway. And that was really decided by our head of school and the senior leadership. And I have to say, it's really paid off. And we did this through a lens of equity, but we decided early on, we're going to meet everybody halfway. So whether it be students, our families, our employees, we decided that we were going to meet them halfway on where their needs were. And we talked about this yesterday, how some employees needed childcare and different things. And that mantra has really just paid off with our, with just also the morale of our employees. The second thing is our mantra is people are core, and that's a take on PAC again, putting that in the forefront. The third one, which I think is also amazing, and this was early on in the pandemic, we came out with the message to our teachers that good is good enough. And if you really think about that, for an independent school and the kind of rigor that we all take on both as employees and with our students, to be able to say, you know what, good is good enough. That really, again, helped us tremendously throughout the last 13 months. And then lastly, with every decision that we made, and a lot of it was by the fleet of our pants, we asked ourselves 4 questions. And the first one was, is it safe for us to do so? Is it possible for us to do so? Is it in the best interest of our students to do so? And is it in the best interest of the institution to do so?
Okay.
And that's really what's guided our decisions. And so for me, as we look at the next phase of the pandemic and next school year, I would ask all of you, what will be your mantra in your institution?
Diane, I want to build off of something you just said about people being core, and connect it to Carrie, something you were talking about. You were talking about the number of different roles you have in your school and your opening, and you mentioned the number of classroom proctors you now have, right? So one of the challenges is, look, we are independent schools are communities of human beings, right? And we are, especially as we are, because of the people within that community. And lots of people have taken different roles. People have been hired to fill new roles. There's been a lot of changing, but a number of those roles are not going to be needed next year, or old roles are going to be needed again. Can the 3 of you talk about how you're addressing the very human side of the fact that there are people in those positions who need jobs, and yet what the school is going to need next year is going to be very different than what the school needed this year?
Yeah, Ari, I'll take that real quick. I've in the last few years, I've taken on a larger role with respect to the substitution process and how that works. And so, early on the pandemic, before being in Los Angeles, before we could even realize that it was going to be a year-long process, I was meeting with the principal and saying, okay, so are you ready for me to staff the sub pool? And that conversation sort of devolved from conversations about the sub pool to, obviously getting the teachers back and those kinds of conversations. But when it did come time, again, we sit in an urban part of Los Angeles. So the problem was we didn't find out until a week before that we were coming back into hybrid. So my conversation shifted immediately to, oh my gosh, how am I going to get 15 classroom proctors qualified, live scan, and get them trained with all of the different protocols that we had and still have? And then, Ari, to your point, how does that transition and look like for next year when we will be back to the old substitute, potentially the old substitute model? So I hired a whole group of relatively recent college grads. And this was really their first experience in the real world of having a job, and they're thrilled about it. It's not a tremendously taxing responsibility, but they understand the importance of it and they're grateful for it.
Malika, looked like you had something you wanted to add as well.
Yes, we also hired college grads and a couple parents to proctor, and they all have started end dates. We hired a school nurse and she's also temporary. So we set the expectation when we hired them that it would be a temporary position.
I think being really clear with people about those expectations go a long way, right? When you can figure that out up front. Malik, if I sort of look, I want to pull forward a thread from yesterday's conversation. Right at the end, we started talking about vacation time. And I want to connect that with what you said at the beginning about, and I appreciate your transparency. It's been a year, right? We're just all exhausted. You were talking about your kids and your family. Certainly my wife and I had the same experience. I think many people have, right? And so the vast majority of people who are in staff roles in independent schools have not come close to being able to take the vacation time that they are contractually have available. Now, that is not a new problem, but it is, I think, being greatly exacerbated because they're coming off of now 2 years of exhaustion and, all encompassing 24-hour a day sort of needing to be available. Can you talk about both how you think about that for your role, but also for your school, making sure that people have the kind of time to come back refreshed, and also that the school is making available the amount of time that people are contractually obligated, allowed to take?
So for teachers, we let them carry over an extra personal day. So usually they can carry over one. This year they're able to carry over 2. And for our administration, I think it will fall on me to follow up with every single member of our team and make sure, when is your vacation scheduled? You do need to take this vacation. We prefer that everyone takes it in July so that, we have time in August to prepare. But I will be following up with each individual administrator and staff member, making sure that they take the time.
Diane and Carrie, what do you guys think?
Yeah, we actually did something pretty radical. We took the opportunity because of the pandemic to do a major overhaul on our benefits. And we are actually moving to a PTO model. Majority of our staff and administrators are already at the 2-year cap for vacation. But what we did is we actually realigned the benefits so that we lowered the amount of PTO. We're actually going to give everybody a cash out in July. Mm-hmm. And what we decided to do, and again, focusing on balance, is we extended the school holiday break time for all non-faculty. So starting July 1, everyone will get the full 2 weeks off at Christmas, winter break, and the full Thanksgiving week off. And so we redirected a focused, purposeful, balanced time off during the school breaks where the school will literally be shut down.
Yeah, I do know a few heads of schools that have already decided that they are simply closing the campus for 2 weeks in the summer, right? Whether it's several of them are doing the last week of June, first week of July, right? Partially depends what region of the country you are in. Summer camp, there'll be some very limited staff there for things like summer camp, but by and large, they're just hitting pause, right? They're saying to everybody, this is your time. They're going to allow on a case-by-case basis some people to work if it makes sense for them with other vacation needs and things like that. But that's certainly a tool that I've seen some other people using. I'm curious, related to, before we let the guests in, we were talking about recruitment. This is a year where it's hard to know exactly, right, what staffing may be related to classroom size, for example. There are, of course, a group of schools that know they will, of course, be full. There are many, many schools which were much more full this year because of a late bump. And it's just a lot less clear this year. Can you all talk about how you're approaching staffing, and not just how you're filling roles, but how it might change the kind of person you're looking for both faculty and staff roles in this kind of new COVID layered world that we're in?
Ari, I think one of the things that I have noticed about recruitment is that people are in a state of flux. Some people are just not sure whether they're prepared to move yet or not. At the beginning of the school year, we did have a number of teachers who had just in that 3 or 4 month period from March to June had decided that they would not be returning, even though they had a signed agreement. And so we let them out of those agreements and they moved across the country to be near family and friends, or, maybe their hometown. But going into this year, we have actually, Loyola has a higher than ever enrollment. We're excited about that. We are making all of the same provisions and decisions that we're making or that we have made in the past, but it has been a little bit more difficult to find people who are interested, maybe because they're in a job right now where they feel safe and they're afraid to move. But we're just not seeing the kinds of candidates show interest as they have in the past. Even so, Loyola in the past has never had a problem attracting strong candidates. So in that respect, it is also a little bit difficult for us.
Sure.
Something we did different this year is we removed the names and address from all of our candidates who applied. So the hiring committee picked the resumes blindly, picked the candidates blindly. And that was really interesting. I wouldn't say we're having problems recruiting, but we have a lot of positions to recruit for. We have a lot of people moving out of state.
Mm-hmm.
And as Carrie said, some people moved out of state during the school year. So that was difficult, having to hire during the middle of the year.
Sure. And I just want to reemphasize something that you mentioned. We talked a lot yesterday about diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice initiatives. And look, there are big school-wide initiatives, right? But there are also just blocking and tackling good practices that I think are pretty easy to implement. And there are numerous good resources now about bias in the hiring process, right? And to me, being able to say, look, we're making progress with having names removed from applications, having, those sort of identifiers. I mean, that is really tangible things that you can point to about the work your school is doing. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's an opportunity for a lot of schools. That's certainly by itself not sufficient, but it is certainly part of the collective whole. Diane, do you have anything you want to add to this topic?
I would just say that kind of like what Carrie said, one of the trends we're seeing also in recruitment, we are recruiting more local candidates, just not getting the draw of out of state as much, but I think that's more to do with the cost of living of the Bay Area as opposed to the pandemic itself, but definitely more focus on local candidates.
One of the things I know many schools are struggling with right now related to teachers is it is in many areas of the country, and certainly California is one of them, incredibly difficult to bring in a candidate to visit for a day to teach, for example, right? That involves a level of risk that very few schools are willing to take. Now, as vaccinations become more prevalent, that may begin to ease. But can you guys talk about how your schools have adapted your policies, not just to deal with the pandemic, but looking forward, thinking about the skill sets that people are going to need in the future that might be different than the skill sets that they would have needed in the past?
The nice piece is with out-of-state candidates, we've been able to let them have a Zoom lesson over Zoom, and our kids are used to it. So we have used Zoom as a tool for out-of-state candidates.
That's great.
Yeah, that's what we're doing as well. We just are at the, we would rather bring our students back to campus rather than to bring visitors back. That's our commitment to our students and to our faculty and staff as well. So we are definitely utilizing every virtual opportunity. I find myself doing things that I would have never thought, like actually having a Zoom conference to just debrief about a meeting, where normally I would walk over to another building. But the good side of that virtual piece is that it allows us to save time. And, Loyola is a very large campus, so I'm not having to traverse, 10 minutes across campus just to be there 5 minutes, which turns out to be 20 minutes because I encounter people along the way. So it definitely has had some good things too.
So let me ask a follow-up about that. And Diane, you may want to jump into that topic or this one as well. So there are great things about efficiency, Carrie, about what you just said, but what we lose is that organicness, right? I think many of us are yearning for that. In fact, I joined Minerva Institute now a little bit more than 6 months ago. Next month, when I show up for our graduation, it will be the first time I have actually met the other members of the president's cabinet in person, right? I've been working with them closely for half a year. So can you, the three of you, talk about how as HR leaders and business leaders in your school, you're trying to get that balance right in the new world that we're moving into of efficiency and safety and community building among employees? Diane, do you have thoughts on either of those topics?
Yeah, I think, what's become critical for us, because we're missing out on that in-person connection with a lot of candidates during recruitment, is we're relying much more heavily on mentors, people that are chosen within the institution to kind of really be mentors to either recently new hires so that they feel that connection because they're not able to be here in person. And it's really forced us to take sort of a stronger look at how we do onboard and mentor new hires in general. Because I think mentorship takes a lot of time and commitment, and it's often done kind of at the last minute, who has time. And so it has allowed us to kind of focus more on that program for us.
Sure. And while we're sort of going around, if there are audience members that want to add your questions, please go ahead and do it to the chat. Malika and Carrie, what do you both think?
Malika, you want to go?
Yeah, I was just thinking how hard it is to, like right now we have a no visitor policy. And I'm getting questions, can such and such come on campus? And we have decided to follow San Francisco Department of Health. So a lot of times we're behind, the CDC says you can do it, but San Francisco says no.
That was one of my next questions. So let's dig into that right there. How are you all handling this? The CDC just changed some recommendations today about outdoors. How are you all handling expectations related to the multiple agencies that you're working with?
Well, we're sticking to San Francisco Department of Health. So when they change their guidelines, we follow their method. But as far as like recruiting over Zoom, we got some really good candidates last year because we did have some teachers leave, in the beginning of the year. Mm-hmm. So I think since we've had that experience where we had to recruit in November to get teachers on campus, our staff and our faculty, they're more comfortable, hiring over Zoom or having those lessons presented. And I do look forward to the day when we can all be on campus together and have visitors again. When San Francisco says we can. So.
I'd like to chime in on that because Los Angeles is much like San Francisco in that, we're handling it very conservatively. Yeah. And the beauty of being in HR is the fact that, and California HR, we're really trained to be considering the laws that are most generous to the employees. So it's very easy to flip that and say, what is the safest for the employees? And I think that, relative to making those kinds of decisions when it comes to having people on campus, I have no trouble at all saying, I just can't have a visitor. I can't have it. This is for your protection. Yeah, so.
So let's dig into that because that's one of the topics I was hoping we'd get into today a little bit more, which is, look, this is the Cal-ISBOA conference. You are in California, and California is a very unique HR landscape, right? If I was, leading this for PAISBOA, right, in my neck of the woods here, we'd be having a different conversation in Pennsylvania, quite honestly, about some of these topics. We all recognize that our schools exist to educate tiny human beings, or in some cases, high school human beings, right? But, you know, and there is a premium put on the needs and the benefits for students. And you are in a state that highly prioritizes the safety of workers, right? And can you talk about lifting up both of those needs, even though at times there is tension between them, as much as there is also potential synergy? I'll just throw anybody who wants to dive into that one.
I would just go back to the 4 questions we ask ourselves with every decision. Like recently, we announced that we are returning 100% in person on May 10th with all of our students at the same time. So no more cohorts. And you know, the way our head of school put in the communication to our PAC was, she listed those 4 questions. Is it safe for us to do so? Yes. Is it in the best interest of our students? Yes. Is it in the best interest of the institution? And is it possible? And I think once you have those guiding principles to basically substantiate or support the decision you're making, it becomes very well received. And you know, I think we had majority of our faculty excited and thrilled at the decision to come back 100% remote. And part of that was, again, I go back to also transparency and communication.
So Diane, let's talk about the ones who were not as thrilled, right? Because I think that's the challenge that every HR, CFO, business officer, head of school has been struggling with. For the adults in your community who were either scared to come back and or had, you know, legitimate medical claims about coming back, can you talk about not just how have you dealt with that this year, which is in some ways I think the easier question, as you look toward next year, right? When there's, I think, going to be a much higher level of expectation from parents, you know, that idea you talked about, Diane, of good is good enough, I think works for this year. I think people understand that. My gut tells me that's going to be much less well received next year and even less so in the year after, right? So how do you intend to meet that going forward?
So again, we've been very straightforward with our PAC from the very beginning. So we agreed that we were going to meet them halfway this year, but we have said all along that we expect everyone to be back in person in the fall. And so that message has been ingrained in everyone's head for months now. And so with that, basically, we are being more aggressive in terms of the start of the new school year, but we made the decision to be flexible to the end of this school year. So if the ones who are not comfortable coming back on May 10th, we're again meeting them halfway. And any employee who's raised concerns about the next fall, we've said, well, we can give you an unpaid leave of absence. And that's how we've handled it. So we're putting our foot down for the new school year, but we agreed to meet them halfway or where their needs are this year.
How about the two of you? What are you guys thinking about?
We came back in November, hybrid schedule. And so we had about 10 teachers out with proctors. In January, we told them we were coming back, you know, full time. Actually, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. We came back in November and there were no proctors. We worked really hard to get a really good schedule where we did not need proctors for these hybrid days. Then in January, we hired proctors. So we did that over the winter break. We're hiring, well, we're supposed to be off. And we hired the proctors for those 10 teachers. Now, then all of our teachers got vaccinated. So those teachers who were vaccinated and had health conditions, most of them were ready to come back. So we said, we're coming back after spring break. This is when everyone's coming back. We had a couple teachers who really did not have good reasons not to come back other than they weren't comfortable. And we took the stand that everyone needed to come back because we were afraid that other teachers would then say, oh, I'm not coming back either because I'm not comfortable. So those teachers effectively resign. We lost 2 teachers. But I think it was the right thing to do because I think it was fair to everyone. The teachers are fully vaccinated. They no longer had a health condition. And it was simply like a mind, like, I don't want to be in the classroom. And unfortunately, our students need their teachers in the classroom. So.
Carrie, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I would say, again, coming from Los Angeles, coming from Loyola, which is, just this really warm, touchy-feely environment where everyone is really involved, very much so. I would say that in probably about September, we really realized that some of our employees were having more difficulty than others deciding to come back. And even though, we kept saying, listen, next month, and we really handled it sort of in bite-sized pieces. But what we really tried to focus on was there was this communication piece that was happening between administration and the faculty. And then there was almost a lack of communication or lack of understanding that was apparent with the staff. And so what we started doing was these town hall meetings, and we started to have them. They were about every 3 or 4 weeks. And what we began to learn is that over time, people got more and more comfortable with the understanding that they were going to be coming back. So it wasn't until March that we were actually in person with hybrid, although our staff actually did come back a little bit earlier than that. And at this point, we have, I'm going to say, all but about 12 teachers who are teaching remotely from home. They've been granted an accommodation through, as Malika said, through the end of this school year. And the expectation is that 100%, including those 12, will be on campus for the fall. And just to add a fine point, we are not requiring that people get vaccinated. We are encouraging, we are recommending, we are supporting, but we're not requiring it. And so we're really trying to be sensitive in that way as well. But we anticipate that, even if the mask mandate goes away, we will probably still require masks. So
I want to weave in a question from Gretchen in the chat. So we've talked largely about faculty, right? And that seems more clear. There are some staff who are just more productive at home, right? There are also staff who you can have in your school community who can work part-time in ways at home that may be more financially efficient for the school than having a full-time person in an office, right? How are you all thinking about those distinctions? Again, less so for this year, but more so for next year, about staff for which it may be advantageous for one party, the other party, or both parties, separate from classroom-based teachers, which I think for many schools is a more clear-cut thing because of the advantage of obviously being with students.
So, oh, go ahead.
So sorry. We're trying to design like a workflow chart for our managers where they can determine for themselves if their employees can work from home. We do know that FaceTime is important to, be around your colleagues, but we did learn that a lot of people get more work done at home, right? Me being one of them, because there's less interruptions. There's less people walking in and out of your office, and you can focus. So we do want to put in a remote work policy. We haven't done it yet, but we also want to approach it from an equity lens. So we want it to be fair to the hourly employee or the salaried employee, and we haven't quite figured that out yet.
I was going to add, we had a telecommute policy in place before the pandemic, and we basically tweaked it for the current pandemic. It is something we're looking at. We did also learn that there are some positions within the school that absolutely can work remotely. I think the issue that came up for us, and I'm curious to hear if it came up for others, is there's this perception amongst some in our community that those that are working from home somehow are not working hard and not working enough. And so you have folks like, say, in the business office who are here every day. And then you have others in other departments, like maybe advancement or whatever, admissions, what have you, that are working from home. And people have this perception that, gee, so-and-so's not working. And that, I think, has created some problems that we're going to need to figure out. But I'm curious if anyone else experienced that.
I'd like to go ahead and chime in. Something that I've been thinking about, while Loyola is not a remote advocate, it's just not what we do. I do want to consider creating some sort of an opportunity. I'm going to hold back calling it a policy, but to create an opportunity where there is, whether it's 1 day a month or 2 days a month, where specific jobs would be allowed to work remotely on a particular day that they specify, which would ideally satisfy, their interest that I'm more productive at home, but it would also keep them active in the community life that we offer. And I think for us, certainly any of us could easily say, well, we're more productive at home. But I know for myself, just even today, I've had probably in my 10-hour day so far, I've probably had about 15 people come into my office that would have not happened if I had been remote. They wouldn't have popped up on my Zoom. They wouldn't have emailed and said, hey, can we meet together? So
and
the fact that
is not productive, right? And
yeah,
that's a hard
right.
thing to calculate.
Yes. So the fact that I was here for them, I look at as a bonus. Even though it's a little bit of a drag and a drain on my time, that is what I'm here for. And I want to make sure that I demonstrate my expectations of everyone in the community that, listen, we can all do this together. But by the same token, I do want to really think about opportunities where people would feel that it's an added benefit if maybe there were a couple of days a month that they could designate working remotely.
Well, and this question, Carrie, about policy versus whatever else you want to call it, right? I've been a director of enrollment management and a director of institutional advancement. It is certainly true that admission officers for decades have stayed home reading admission files right after the interview season commences and before committee. It has been true for probably decades that fundraisers who have meetings off campus don't necessarily drive, in some cases, especially with California traffic, an hour into the school to then turn around and go meet with somebody somewhere else, right? So that has happened idiosyncratically for a long time. And I think the question of flexibility versus policy, consistency, and equity, right? There are real challenges to get that right. And there is a spotlight on it now in a way that there hasn't been before. And that's one of the challenges. Malika, you look like you had something you wanted to add.
No, we haven't experienced any resentment from other departments, or because the policy this year was basically, if you touch the students, if your job requires you to be at school, you need to be at school. But otherwise, you can work hybrid, you can come in every day, or you can work from home. I think that the teachers appreciated that policy because there were less people on campus. Everybody was worried about COVID, and if there's less people on campus, there's less of a risk for you. I mean, I think that's how our team looked at it. So there was not a lot of that, oh, they get to do this, because it was available to everyone.
I also think this is a moment where schools can be transparent with their professional communities. Different groups of workers have different work expectations. Hourly workers have different work expectations than exempt employees. Salaried workers in certain roles have different needs and expectations than other roles. The obvious one is teachers and other staff, but it breaks down much more nuance in that. And I think when schools have good guidelines about that, it allows also for good flexibility. I heard a podcast this morning that I wanted to get your thoughts about. It was about that as social beings, we really need ongoing practice in how to socialize well, right? And that one of the challenges as people get back together is that we're actually out of practice being in large groups together, right? And I'm curious, I think almost everybody's looking forward to being back on campus together. And yet there is this complication, right? Of kind of our biorhythms of the academic year being thrown off. I'm curious how you all are thinking about that process of bringing people back together next year. Do you think that the opening of the school year will be different? What are you all thinking about, or is it still too far away to be imagining?
I think we can imagine and just know that it may change based on the conditions. But yes, I met with a mentor last week, and it was she's vaccinated, fully vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated. And it was so weird to see her without the mask. And I met her husband and I was like, should I shake his hand? Like, I don't know. It's a different.
This podcast was specifically about handshaking. So I'm like,
but yeah, I agree with that. And I do wonder like how we will have our company meetings. I mean, like our company meetings, our school meetings, our faculty meetings. But right now, everyone's still meeting over Zoom. Like if I'm meeting with an employee, it's even if when we're in the office, we're not in the office together.
Yeah.
One of the comments that I had heard, and I think I've shared this with you, Ari, is that people are not used to making accommodations for people. I mean, accommodations, yes, but if you're accommodating people via Zoom, as opposed to that person in the office next to me is so loud on the phone, or they're so irritating, they never put their dish in the dishwasher. We're used to doing that at home, but not in the workplace because it's just been so different and we're out of practice.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Diane or Carrie?
I mean, I agree with Malika in the sense that we haven't really thought too much as far as, how we'll be able to gather. One thing we know for certain is that the health and safety protocols are not going away anytime soon, for sure. So we anticipate masks and all of those to continue. But I think we're just like you, we're going to have to wait and see what the county health department says, the CDC, all of that. And just like we did last summer, make decisions as we get more information.
So Diane, let me ask you a follow-up question about that. And we're gonna transition in a few minutes into some final thoughts. But look, incidents of flu this year were way down, not surprisingly, right? Because everybody was wearing masks. People at schools will probably be in masks in the fall. At some point, people are going to stop wearing masks, right? I don't think 4, 5, 6 years from now, we're going to have schools full of human beings in masks. And yet there are some policies that I think many of us would love to see become ingrained. If you are not feeling well, do not come to school, right? We're already seeing huge problems with parents sending kids to school with pending COVID tests, right? And yet, in general, I think people are, in general, being much better, right, about not coming to work in person if you feel sick, not being careful about how you cough, all those things. Can the three of you talk about how you're hoping to embed some of those positive changes in your school, as the immediacy of COVID begins to fade a little bit?
At Loyola, we have always encouraged people, if you're sick, don't come to school. So
have they followed it?
Well, therein lies the issue. So I do think there is an opportunity now for the question, if people are in a position where they can remain home, and even though they might be able to, whether it's a teacher, they can teach remotely, I think we need to be able to handle that. I think that teachers, don't have to take a sick day necessarily just because they're have the sniffles. I think that it's a respect position to simply say, listen, if you're not feeling up to teaching, or if you're not feeling up to being in admissions, doing your job today, then take a sick day. But if you are sick and you're symptomatic in some form or fashion, that's okay. If you feel like doing your job, then don't take a sick day, but be online.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like you're talking about a 3-tiered thing, where maybe instead of just subs, there are sub/proctors for teachers when they don't feel like they should be in the classroom, but they do feel well enough to be teaching. Is that right?
Absolutely. And that really is sort of what we're doing right now with, we are allowing teachers to teach remotely if they're not, if they're, doing whatever, if they're not feeling up to it. So it's just a matter of re-emphasizing that we want you to stay home. And now the pandemic has created an opportunity for them to take us seriously.
Yeah, Malika and Diane, what do you guys think about this?
I completely agree. Completely agree. We've had several teachers awaiting COVID test results, or we've even had a teacher with COVID who continued to teach.
Yeah.
So I think using that option next year would be great.
I would add, we should all consider extending that through the lens of the student experience. Think about the student who has a concussion and doesn't want to miss school. Most of those kids, or the kid who's maybe sick and still comes to school because they're petrified of missing a class. We now have owls. We now have the technology in place. Can we as a school continue to provide that flexibility to our students and families as well? And that is something we're definitely going to consider in the new school year.
And of course, one of the challenges that always come with that is going to be the very small number of people who will abuse those policies, right? And you need to think about that. I do want to encourage everyone in the audience to, this is a real opportunity to manage up from your roles, right? Clearly, you are not in a position to suggest forcefully to your head of school or other senior administrators that they model the way in this respect. But I think there is something really powerful when senior administrators share with the community, I'm not coming in today because blank, right? That gives license and sets an expectation for others in a way that very few written policies can. So with that, and sort of with the time in mind, I'd love to have some final thoughts from each of you. Does one of you want to jump in first?
Well, I'll jump in first just by sort of recapturing what my sentiments were at the beginning, which is I'm actually grateful for the pandemic. I'm grateful that it taught us how to be better listeners, how to be more compassionate, and consider each individual's contributions, even though they might be different.
Okay. Something I really appreciated about the pandemic was the collaboration between departments. We often collaborate within the business office or within your own groups, but our COVID and safety committee or our movement committee, we had teachers and parents and business staff. And, it was just great to communicate and collaborate with different departments and just see other people use their strengths in ways you're not normally used to seeing.
Absolutely.
I would circle back to decision-making processes. Again, as the next school year, as we confront the next school year, what sort of processes around decision-making are we going to keep and which ones are we going to let go?
Yeah.
I think that'll be key.
And I want to thank our panelists. We still have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to share a closing thought of my own, which is really to circle back to where I started yesterday's panel with. I am so impressed by Martha and Cal-ISBOA and the collaboration that we're seeing in support of member schools. I think there were about a dozen people last night on the just open Q&A session that we had with Deborah and with Martha and me. And there are not a lot of areas in the country where you see two heads of membership organizations engaging so thoughtfully together, right, in service to members and member schools. I don't know if you realize in California how special that is, but it is, and I want you to know that. There is a lot of innovation happening from both of those organizations and in ways that are synergistic. And I think that reflects something we're seeing in the independent school world in general, which is much more transparent collaboration. You know, I know everyone is worried about the fact that we compete with each other, and there are real concerns related to things like collusion issues, right? But as often as not, we hide behind those as reasons to not play nicely in the sandbox with one another. And so, yes, you should not talk about next year's tuition before it's announced with peer schools, right? That's a clear line in the sand. And yet there are multiple areas where schools within a market, schools of similar configuration across different markets can be incredibly supportive of one another. And so I encourage you to continue to do that. I've so enjoyed spending the last couple of days with you all. And I'm going to throw it back to Martha to close us out.
I'm just going to say, I think Ari and I have been really looking for an excuse to work together. And so this has been a wonderful excuse for me to work with Mission and Data and Ari and talk about some of these things. But one of the things that has become so clear in this last year is how critical the HR function, whether there is a dedicated HR person in the school or whether the CFO not only holds that responsibility, but also wears that hat. And with all the, changes in guidance, and, that's our new language now. Well, we got new guidance today. And all the things that have become the responsibility of the business office and the HR function, testing, vaccine, all the different leave policies, all of these things, it's very easy to get mired in the minutia. It is a wonderful opportunity to have these kind of conversations. And again, I'm going to say, I really want to continue to have these conversations. That is one of the things that Cal-ISBOA has learned from this pandemic is that, that is our value to each other. And you may learn something from a school that you are nothing like, and you will learn and adapt, and it will create thinking. And, one of the things, and when I was talking to Carrie earlier, I guess was last week, just talking about the way we're making decisions and that we're learning that we can make decisions much faster than we ever thought possible and make thoughtful decisions because we have to. There has not been the luxury of time this year, So I'm excited by the possibilities that if we can continue to remind ourselves about some of the positive things that we've learned and carry them forward, but it's going to have to be intentional. So that's my hope. And it's always a pleasure for me to see all of you and to work with Ari. And I am going to, end this 2 minutes early. We've been doing so well on keeping everybody on schedule, and just remind everybody that there's a 15-minute break, and then we will all have the privilege of closing out with Mr. Blatcher and his legal update. So now we all feel really good. Let's see how good we feel after the legal update. And I thank you so much, all of you, and everybody who attended. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.